Hi, my name is Christina Cable, and my infectious disease is Cryptococcosis. So this is a cell just to kind of give you a visual of what it looks like. So it has the capsule, the cell membrane, and then the cell wall, which contains melanin that I'll talk about later as one of the mechanisms. So Cryptococcosis is also known as Cryptococcus neoformans infection, and Cryptococcus neoformans is actually the species. And Cryptococcus neoformans is the causative agent for cryptococcosis. So this is actually a fungi, and C. neoformans is an encapsulated environmental yeast. So this spherical fungus reproduces by budding at any point on the surface. So buds are actually attached to the parent cell by a thin wall and narrow spores. So this is a photo of Cryptococcus neoformans. So you can see the endospores that are in the cells. So Cryptococcus neoformans has two life cycles, so it either goes through an asexual form or a sexual form. So you can see here, how it does that, but in both forms it produces vasodiaspores. So they aren't necessarily strains of Cryptococcus neoformans, but there are stereotypes, and they're separated by two varieties. So Cryptococcus neoformans variety neoformans stereotypes are A, D, and AD, and these mostly been isolated from pigeon or bird droppings that contaminate the soil. And then Cryptococcus neoformans variety Gadi, the stereotypes are B and C, and these have been isolated from decaying wood, mostly in eucalyptus trees. So the two varieties are similar, except that their vasodiaspores are the shapes are differently. And to have a definitive identification between the two varieties are by biochemical tests. C. neoformans is a fungus that resides in the environment throughout the entire world. Specifically in soil, decaying wood, tree hollows, and bird droppings. Cryptococcus neoformans infection is not contagious, but mostly infects individuals who have a weakened immune system. So those who are at risk are immunocompromised persons, those living with advanced HIV/AIDS, organ transplant recipients, persons taking corticosteroids or any immunosuppressive medications, those such as taking medications for rheumatoid arthritis. They are at the highest risk to get this infection. It is extremely rare for those healthy to get this infection. It can happen, but it is rare. So this is the mechanisms. So there's two, polysaccharide capsule and melanin. So Cryptococcus neoformans can synthesize a thick polysaccharide capsule. This capsule interferes with the macrophages that engulf invading cells in the body. Basically, this capsule protects Cryptococcus neoformans cells from the immune system. If the macrophages are able to engulf the capsule, then the capsule allows the Cryptococcus neoformans cells to survive and then reproduce inside the macrophage. Then the next one is melanin. So you probably heard of melanin as the pigment that does your skin color or freckles or stuff like that. But for Cryptococcus, melanin offers a protection from the process of oxidative killing. In host immune cells like macrophages, killing of foreign cells is accomplished by exposing the engulfed foreign cells to a highly reactive molecule called free radicals, which then will react with DNA and proteins, and then this uncontrolled reaction is often proved fatal. But melanin really just serves to protect the Cryptococcus cells by reacting with free radicals to then neutralize them. So this is the pathology. So cryptococcosis usually affects the lungs or the central nervous system, or the brain and the spinal cord. Brain infections due to the fungus are called cryptococcal meningitis. As I said earlier, Cryptococcus neoformans infections are extremely rare in people who are healthy. It can occur, but it is extremely rare. But most cases of Cryptococcus neoformans infection occurs in those who have a weakened immune system, as I said earlier, specifically those who have advanced HIV or AIDS. Symptoms. Cryptococcus neoformans infection can cause like pneumonia-like symptoms. And they include cough, shortness of breath, chest pain, and fever, and sometimes can cause weight loss. Cryptococcal meningitis symptoms include headache, fever, neck pain, nausea, vomiting, sensitivity to light, or confusion or changes in behavior. So this is actually a scan of a patient's brain who's infected with Cryptococcus neoformans and cause cryptococcal meningitis. So basically, Cryptococcus neoformans causes lesions on the patient's brain, then leading to the meningitis. Cryptococcus neoformans meningitis can lead to permanent neurological damage, and the mortality rate of the meningitis really just depends on, your geographic location, the access to medical care that you have, and the immune status of the host. So basically, if you're immunocompromised. Transmission. So Cryptococcus neoformans enters the body through respiratory route because we breathe in the spores that are then in the contaminated soil. So this can lie in your body and be latent and dormant and not cause any infection, and later on become active and cause, a pulmonary infection or something serious like cryptococcal meningitis. So this is not contagious. The infection cannot spread between people or people and animals. And yes, pets can get Cryptococcus neoformans infection. It is extremely rare, and the infection cannot spread between animals and people. So here's a photo kind of how to show you how it happens. So this is the bird droppings or the pigeon droppings in the soil. The spores are then breathed in. It goes in, it infects the lungs, and then it can go through the blood vessels and infect the brain. So diagnosis. So there really are 3 ways to clinically diagnose the Cryptococcus neoformans infection. The first one is culture, and culture is the most prominent way to diagnose it. Microscopy, they use India ink on cerebrospinal fluid to then visualize the Cryptococcus cells under a microscope, and then antigen detection. So they use cerebrospinal fluid or the serum to then detect the antigens. This one is mostly done in HIV-infected patients, but healthcare providers really rely on medical history, the symptoms that you're presenting, physical examinations, and then the laboratory tests to diagnose the Cryptococcus neoformans infection. They can take a sample of tissue or bodily fluid, your cerebrospinal fluid or blood, sometimes sputum, to then send to the lab and then be examined for either under the microscope, culture, or the antigen test. They can also perform tests such as x-rays or CT scans of your lungs or brain. So as I showed earlier, that was a scan of someone's brain infected with Cryptococcus neoformans meningitis to kind of see what's going on. There is another approach to prevent cryptococcal meningitis, which is called targeted screening, and this is done especially in immunocompromised patients. So in a targeted screening, a simple blood test is used to detect the cryptococcal antigen to then indicate if there is a cryptococcal infection in HIV-infected patients before they go take their antiretroviral treatment. So this is the treatment. So those who have Cryptococcus neoformans infection need to take a prescriptive antifungal medication for at least 6 months. Usually it's longer, but it has to at least be 6 months. And the specific type of treatment really depends on the severity of the infection and what parts of the body is being affected. For people who have asymptomatic infections, diagnosed through the targeted screening before, any symptoms occur, or mild to moderate pulmonary infections, are used this. I'm not going to pronounce it because I'm not going to say it right. So they use this. And for people who have severe lung infections, like those who really have severe pneumonia-like symptoms or infections to the central nervous system, the brain and the spinal cord, they have an initial treatment of this, and then they go in with a combination with and then after that combination, patients then need to take, this initial antifungal medication for an extended period of time to then clear the infection. The type, dose, and duration of the antifungal treatment really differs on, groups of people such as pregnant women, children, and yeah. So this is the incidences and prevalence. So how common are Cryptococcosis neoformans infections? They are really rare, with those who have healthy immune systems, but Cryptococcosis neoformans is a major cause of illness in people living with HIV or AIDS. So there is an estimate, according to the CDC, there is an estimate of 152,000 cases of cryptococcal meningitis occurring worldwide. So this is where the most severe case of, an infection to your nervous system. Cryptococcosis infections in the United States. So before there was any before, there was any AVT therapy, the fungal and any opportunistic infections were a major problem for people with HIV and AIDS. But because we found but now that we have that therapy, the infections and deaths have significantly dropped in the US and other developed countries. Basically, the most prevalent cases are those in underdeveloped countries, those with less access to healthcare, and countries that have a major prevalence of advanced HIV and AIDS. For example, sub-Saharan Africa, that's where they have the most amount of cases. So research efforts. What is the CDC doing about Cryptococcosis neoformans? So basically what they're doing is trying to reduce illness and death from cryptococcal meningitis, which includes working with healthcare programs to introduce and implement cryptococcal screening and treatment, such as the targeted screening talked about before with those living with advanced HIV and AIDS. Helping healthcare programs assess costs and impact of the cryptococcal screenings that they will have, and then support training of clinical and laboratory staff on diagnosing, treatment, and then managing the infection and cryptococcal meningitis. And then overall, just collaborating with partners to improve cryptococcal diagnosis and then the antifungal drugs. So this is the history. So Cryptococcosis neoformans was actually first isolated from peach juice in Italy in 1894. And shortly thereafter, there was an infected woman, lesions on a woman's tibia, and revealing that this is a human pathogen. And then over the years, they finally decided up the name of Cryptococcosis neoformans, and yeah. And then this is just my works cited. Thank you.